The day of the week, Tuesday. The day of the year, November 29th. The year, 2016. But this is 3000 NFL Mock Draft, the weekly NFL draft podcast where myself, Kenneth Arthur of fieldgoals.com, and Rob Staten of SeahawksDraftBlog.com get together and we talk about the NFL draft. We talk about the Seahawks. We talk about college football. And it's all coming together right here every week on NFL Mock Draft 3000, that is. It stands for the year 3000, but today we're going to talk about the year 2017. It's the closest new year coming to us right now, and we're going to be talking about draft prospects. We're going to be talking about how they fit in with the NFL, and we're going to talk about the Seahawks soon, eventually, too. But a special episode today as myself, the fan, the novice, Kenneth Arthur, who knows the NFL, knows teams, but maybe has the more cursory understanding of some of the college players and some of the draft prospects, whereas Rob Staten, he knows a lot of these guys inside and out. He's been studying them. So I've created my 2017 NFL mock draft, and Rob is going to tell me why either it was a good pick or he can roast me and just say why it was a bad pick. And we can talk about it and basically work on that together so that if you're making a mock draft, and you had some of the same ideas that I have, maybe you can get some of the critiques that you would need to make new editions of that mock draft. So that's what we're going to do today. We're also going to talk about the Seahawks. We're also going to talk about some of the other prospects in the draft maybe later on. Rob's created a 7-round mock draft for the Seahawks. So if you're listening to this and you're a Seahawks fan and you're thinking to yourself, I don't know, I don't want to listen to Kenny's mock draft. That sounds dumb. Well, give it a little bit of a chance because we are going to talk about Seahawks and we're going to talk about Washington, the Huskies. We're going to talk about all that kind of stuff. So make sure that you do stick around for that. In fact, let's just start off with the Seahawks loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 14-5. Scott Kasmer on Twitter of Football Outsiders, he had been keeping track a long time of the amount of games in a row that the Seahawks had been within 7 points or 8 points in the fourth quarter of any game. And that streak came to an end this week, a 98-game streak in which the Seahawks had always been at least within a score in the fourth quarter of every single game, if not blowing out the other team. And they were down. They had I would not say that I know that they didn't get blown out. I would not say, that they had no chance to win the game. They were down 9 points. They had a shot. If they had gone for the field goal or if they had connected on the touchdown, then they were just an onside kick away from making a difference. But the point is that the Seahawks put up 5 points. They were without 5 really good starters. All of those players could be coming back this week, so it could be a totally different story against the Carolina Panthers. But Rob, when you were watching the game, Seahawks, Bucs, the defense allowed. It was the first game without Earl Thomas since 2009, but the defense really locked in after the second drive, giving up 2 touchdowns to Mike Evans. They didn't give up anything. They were negative 2 points for the entire rest of the game. But how much of the loss of Justin Britt and the switch from Justin Britt to the rookie Joey Hunt, who we talked a lot about after the draft, how much of that switch do you think made a difference in the offense imploding, or should we not focus so much on one player and realize this is a team issue?
I think overall it was a team issue. I thought Joey Hunt out of all of the offensive linemen probably played the best actually, and didn't see too many issues with him. I think the main issue on the line losing Britt was that all of a sudden Jermaine Ifedi, for example, is playing alongside another rookie center, somebody he's not familiar with, somebody he's not played with this year, and then the situation at right tackle I found really strange. So you start the game with Gary Gilliam and then almost immediately put in Bradley Sowell. And that's another change. I mean, if Sowell has not played right tackle at any point this year, so Ifedi's got 2 guys that are new either side of him. We're just a week removed from Gilliam and the rest of the line playing really well against Philadelphia. And with it sort of in a state of flux because of Britt's absence, because of the poor start, they then decide to move Gilliam out of the lineup and put Sowell in there. I just didn't understand that at all. I don't think that Hunt sort of being in there was the main issue. Pete Carroll said the stunts kind of really deceived the Seahawks all game and gave them fits. But I don't know about what you think, Kenny, but from a personal point of view, it was probably the least enjoyable Seahawks game I've watched in a long time. When they had the losses to, for example, the Rams over the years, including in Seattle last season, you could kind of chalk it down to, okay, this is a team that's had success against the Seahawks. There's a familiarity there because it's a divisional opponent. They know a bit more about the Seahawks than other teams. They've got Aaron Donald, who's legitimately one of the top players in the league. And their strengths match up nicely against some of the Seahawks' weaknesses. So to go and see the Seahawks play as badly as this and really by a team that, with respect to Tampa Bay, they played well in Kansas City. They're a blossoming team with a very good young quarterback and a terrific wide receiver and a defense that has got some potential there. But they really handed it to the Seahawks. They were more physical. They were tougher. They showed a lot more grit than the Seahawks. They were more balanced across the board, really. And it was just a really unenjoyable watch. Now, I don't think that it's indicative of some long-lasting problems. We've seen the Seahawks have games like this in the past. The Dallas, they've won games like this in the past. So the Dallas game last year, which they squeezed by a team led by Matt Castle, they were poor in that game. They still won it. The Rams game in 2013, the Houston game in 2013. I'm sure there are other examples as well where they just didn't play very well and found a way to win. On this occasion, they didn't, mainly because of the turnovers. So I don't think that, because they've had games like this in the past, I don't think it's necessarily something that's going to linger. But I want to see this. It kind of sucks that this is the last game the Seahawks have played. We need to see them in another game now. We need to see them playing at least at the level they showed against Philadelphia, against Carolina, to really start believing in a deep playoff run again. So get Bennett back, get Thomas back, get some of the other guys back, Britt back, Mike Morgan, Deshaun Shed, hopefully, get all those guys healthy again, get them back in the team, and let's see a strong performance against Carolina, who are a team, I will add, having seen most of the Oakland game at the weekend, even though they lost that game, look threatening on offense. And I know that their offensive line is an issue, and they've lost Ryan Khalil, and the backup center's gone as well, and that could provide a nice caveat for the Seahawks to win this game. But they've lost the last two games against the Panthers, and this has to be an opportunity now to put the record straight, to win, to get some momentum back, and I sincerely hope that's going to happen this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, you can't overlook the Panthers because they've always played them tough, and especially the last two times, just played them to beat them, and those coming last year. So not long ago did the Panthers go 2-0 against the Seahawks. The Panthers are now 4-7. So if you look at that and you say, wow, if they lost a game at home this week to the Carolina Panthers and dropped to 7-4-1, then they have to travel to Green Bay, and the Packers probably feeling a lot more confident with Aaron Rodgers having a good game, and they're not going to give up. There's 5 games left, and the Packers are 2 games back of the Lions. They're not going to give up in any sort of form or fashion. So that's not going to be an easy game. And then you're sitting there and looking at, could 5-1 and 3 straight losses be a possibility? Sure. At the same time, I think it's an entirely different team when you talk about those guys coming back. Michael Bennett is going to play. Deshaun Shed probably is going to play. Mike Morgan is going to play. Earl Thomas very well could play. Justin Britt very well could play. So you look around at it. Tremaine Pope surprisingly could play. So you look around and say it's an entirely different team. And that being said, the season that we're having in the NFL, the leader in the NFC North, the Lions, they're just 7-4. The Falcons are just 7-4, and they've lost Desmond Trufant for the rest of the season. So when you sit there at 7-3-1, suddenly the Seahawks are the number 2 seed in the NFC behind the Dallas Cowboys. When you look at the rest of the NFC, when you look at the Dallas Cowboys with their offensive line, Elliott and Prescott, and Dez Bryant, when you look at the New York Giants, who have surprisingly turned up to 8-3 with all of their new defensive players, and I'm writing an article on the Giants right now, and you look at it from top to bottom on defense with the 4 guys that they signed. They re-signed Jason Pierre-Paul, who just had a monster game and looks like he could be getting a huge contract in the offseason. When you look at, Damon Harrison and Janoris Jenkins and Olivier Vernon and Landon Collins, who I think might be the defensive player of the year right now, And you look around at everything, they haven't even gotten that much, production yet out of rookie cornerback Eli Apple. So there's a lot of interesting things happening with the Giants. When you look at all that, how do you slot the Seahawks in the NFC right now? Are they a solid number 2? But not seeding, but just in talent and ability. Are they a solid number 2 against the Cowboys? Should we actually consider if they're above the Cowboys when healthy? Should they be slotted behind a team like the Lions or the Giants or even the Redskins? How do you rank them in the NFC right now?
Well, I think the thing with the NFC is that there are teams that match up well against other teams. So I actually think that the Seahawks match up quite well with Dallas. I know that Dallas's physical running style has given them some problems in the past. I was there in 2014 when Dallas beat Seattle in Seattle. So I understand that could be an issue, but I think that Dallas's defense will struggle to trouble the Seahawks, and I think a healthy Russell Wilson should be able to move around, make some plays. You would hope so anyway, and that if that game became a bit of a shootout, the same way that Washington and Dallas became on Thanksgiving, that there would at least be a chance that the Seahawks would win that game. I'd actually be a little bit more fearful actually of playing someone. I know it sounds a bit strange, but someone like New York, even in Seattle, because what the Giants have got is pass rushers. You mentioned Jason Pierre-Paul. They've got one or two other defensive linemen that could cause a few issues. They've got a couple of playmakers in the secondary now. They've got a quarterback and a receiver in Odell Beckham. And this kind of combination that has really caused Seattle some issues. Matt Ryan and the Falcons with Julio Jones and a few pass rushers there at the weekend. Gerald McCoy, Noah Spence on defense, and then Mike Evans and Jameis Winston, the quarterback, causing them issues. We have seen sort of this kind of combo work against the Seahawks, and I would equally be extremely confident against pretty much any team, but I'd also be slightly fearful of playing Matt Stafford or Eli Manning or somebody like that. Just because of the way that this team has played over the last season or two. I mean, I think it's a very different Seahawks team that we saw in 2013 and 2014. I think in those 2 seasons, they were the bullies. They were the physical, beat you up, running up the middle, read option. The Seahawks were kind of like churning out 200-yard rushing games in 2013, 2014, whether it was Wilson, whether it was Lynch, whether it was something else. Teams would in sort of inevitably lose their next game after playing the Seahawks because they just felt battered and bruised. They were very tough. It was in a battle of endurance. The Seahawks would turn games into a battle of endurance, a battle of character. Who has got sort of that mental stability. Late in the fourth quarter, having just taken an absolute pounding to see it through. And the Seahawks, more often than not, were the team that was able to do that. And I think this is a very different team. I mean, it's. They're more. I saw a comparison earlier. Someone mentioned this to me. I can't remember. I would love to give this person the credit, but I can't remember who said it. But I think it might have been Kip Earlywine. He used to do some writing on Seahawks Track Log. But I think he kind of compared the Seahawks more to the Patriots than the Seahawks of 2013 and 2014. And I think that he's kind of got a point there, because they've got some players on defense. They've got some skillful, good players, but it's not, an overbearing defense that kind of just smothers teams. They've got a really potentially explosive offense, but game to speak of. It's more of a compliment than anything. And on their day, they can be really good in the passing game, but there are certain teams that provide an antidote to what they offer. So, yeah, it's a very strange thing, and I kind of feel like the Seahawks are maybe a draft or two away still from being the team they want to be. And I'm not quite sure how they're going to get there, Kenny, because they might still win a championship during these next couple of years, but I still think that they need more to sort of be the identity that they want. I mean, the running game is just nothing at the moment. They can't lean on that. They've had Russell Wilson injured all this time, and they can't even lean on a running game. Whether that's the blocking, whether it's needing more physical, beat 'em up style offensive lineman up front, whether it's needing a better running back, more of a bigger bell cow because, Thomas Rawls and Procise have not been able to stay healthy. Alex Collins doesn't look like that guy. They've lost Marshawn Lynch. They don't have that anymore. Do they just need someone who's going to smash it up the middle and beat teams up? I don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. I'm not sure. do they need a big defensive lineman? You know, I wrote about Derek Nandi at Florida State today. Do they need somebody up the middle who can not just, you know, anchor in and do what Brandon Mebane did for so many years, but also provide a bit of a pass rush there? I mean, there's lots of question marks here, and I don't think the Seahawks are what they expected to be this year. I don't think they're where they necessarily want to be, and yet they are still a really, really good team. They are still a really tough team. They're just different. Can they still win the NFC? Yes. But is it going to be a stroll in kind of the way that 2013, you know, stroll's the wrong word, but it was kind of like, it felt like it was inevitable in it to a certain extent for people following the team. I don't think it's going to be as easy as that. And there's every chance that somebody else will be representing the NFC in the Super Bowl this year, sadly.
Right, yeah, anything is definitely possible at this point with the NFC. There's, you know, I think it's still got to come down to the Seahawks and the Cowboys. But, you know, if the Giants get, you know, and the Giants thing is they're 2 games back of the Cowboys. They're the only team that's beat the Cowboys, and they play the Cowboys again. So really the Giants' goal right now is beat the Cowboys and gain one other game. And if they can do that over the final 5 weeks, it'll be the Giants that have got the number 1 seed in the NFC, very likely. And it'll be the Giants that we have to talk about as the team maybe to beat. And if you have to go to New York to beat the Giants, and you have to beat, you know, that defense in New York, New Jersey, whatever, that could be the test. And that's how quickly things change in the NFL. Will we be talking about the Giants as the leaders and the team to watch for in the NFC? But, you know, the Giants, the Cowboys, the Seahawks, I don't think that the Falcons could still make some noise because of their offense. But then you look at it and it's like that is such a one-dimensional offense sometimes with the way that they have no other receiving threats besides Julio Jones, that it really will take, you know, if you go that team up against, you know, a team that has a defense like the Giants or, you know, like the Seahawks, you know, and even if they had to, you know, face a one game against a certain team that had a defense to put them out, you know, as opposed in the Lions, I don't think that they are going to have enough of everything to get to the Super Bowl. But I think sometimes in a dynasty or whatever, like in a team that wins multiple Super Bowls with the same players, you have to maybe get one that maybe felt like, oh, we got away with one this year. You know, in 2014, could that have been like that if they had won the Super Bowl that year? If they had found that touchdown at the end of the game, would that have been sort of like, oh, they got away with one this year? Or we would have been just talking about them as, oh, back-to-back Super Bowl champions. You don't really question that. Instead, maybe it'll, you know, I still think there's a good chance that they could go Super Bowl championship, Super Bowl loss, didn't make the Super Bowl championship. They're good enough to win the Super Bowl, and they could definitely come back next year. They're going to come back with pretty much every single player, unless they release some people. They're going to come back with every single key player, and they're going to go into the draft, and they're going to bring in new guys, and they're going to make some moves, and I won't be surprised if they trade their first-round pick for a veteran. So that's, you know, that's a good opportunity perhaps to transition to the draft and talking about my 2017 NFL mock draft. I'm a guy who hasn't made a mock draft in a few years. I used to do them for fun. I think like a lot of people would. It's nice to play GM and to slot these guys into certain places and see how it looks and see how it fits. I will say that I made this mock draft. I initially started to make this mock draft the first 20 picks or so last week. And then a week of games happened, and I thought, well, there couldn't be too many huge changes. I reordered it, and wow, some teams moved up like 7 spots in just one game. That's how close things are now, that the draft order can have drastic changes week to week. And you look at a team now like the Tennessee Titans, their pick from the Rams, that's now 7th in the draft. The Browns, the pick they got from the Eagles, is now 13th in the draft. So it's gone from the Browns picking first and maybe 22nd because of the Eagles to picking first and maybe 13th. And you're going to get an entirely different kind of prospect at 13 than you're going to get at 22. Maybe the guy at 22 is going to be better. Parentheses, not if he's a quarterback drafted by the Browns. But, you know, overall, you'd rather have that pick that's way higher. That's a gigantic jump. So there's going to be changes now. When you make a mock draft now, the draft order could change way more than you expect. It looks like the Browns have at least like a 95% chance of picking first and everything else could be up for grabs. The Titans have 2 first-round picks. The Browns have 2 first-round picks. The Vikings don't have a first-round pick, and the Rams don't have a first-round pick. So this is sort of going to be a look at that. And going right at the top, the Browns, there's a lot of interesting options. There's a lot of different ways that number 1 picks go. Whoever goes number 1 overall will be, a part of history forever. And, it's usually either going to be a quarterback, a pass rusher, or an offensive tackle. I don't see, obviously, any offensive tackles in this draft that are going to be anywhere near the number 1 pick. I don't see a quarterback that necessarily is going to be the right guy for them, especially when they have another pick, and they've gotten something out of Cody Kessler. So maybe it's not the right time if there's someone that transcends. So it's a very easy first overall pick. Myles Garrett, defensive end. The Browns their leading sack getter has 3.5 sacks. They're a terrible team. They need more defense. They're playing money ball with the new GM. It's a slam dunk. What do you think about Myles Garrett to the Browns?
Yeah, I think there's every chance that they will go in that direction. The only thing that maybe makes me question it, and they really shouldn't question it, because Myles Garrett has been destined to be a high pick ever since he started playing for Texas A&M. But is that the Cleveland front office we saw it with the last draft, have become obsessed with stats. They bring these analytics guys in, and they're not really doing much, analytics other than looking at how big of the stats were. And they're like, anybody who did anything in college football last year was pretty much drafted by the Browns. There are other players who have got better stats than Myles Garrett, and that would make me wonder whether or not they go in a different direction because of that. They may well feel like, for example, Mitch Trubisky, who seems to be, really shooting up the boards, and understandably so, because he's looked really, really good this year. If they don't feel like he's going to be there for their second first-round pick, they might feel obliged to take him with the first overall pick, just to not run the risk of, they have the opportunity to draft a quarterback for the future. If they feel this guy is the guy, then they might take him with the first overall pick. That said, if they don't go in that direction, Myles Garrett makes a lot of sense.
I think I had for every pick, I have another column where I put in an alternative pick for myself to just sort of look at. And the guy that it looks like I have is the alternative pick for number 1 overall, which now is giving me, okay, it's going to be interesting to see. Like I said, sometimes I'm going to get roasted because the guy that I had in the alternative when I started was Tim Williams. Who are some other maybe non-quarterback defensive players, or who are some non-quarterback maybe edge rushers? Anyone else besides Myles Garrett that you are? Because you did say that statistically there might be some other guys, but would Tim Williams be the next guy? Who would be some other options there on defense for number 1?
Well, obviously you mentioned Tim Williams there. Jonathan Allen's had statistically a really good year as well. Reuben Foster for me. I sort of see Jabril Peppers being, touted as a Heisman candidate. Well, if there's any defensive player in the country who warrants it, it's probably Reuben Foster for me at Alabama, the linebacker. I think he's been terrific this year. And then there's this guy who's really sort of risen over the last few weeks, and that's Tack McKinley at UCLA, who has just been sensational. I remember watching him at the start of the year and thinking, there are things to like, could do a better job getting off blocks, but a real raw talent. And then the more and more you watch him, the more excited you get. And statistically, there's not been anybody better than DeMarcus Walker this year at Florida State. Just every single week he turns up and has a big game. And he had a couple more sacks against Florida at the weekend. Was unstoppable in the fourth quarter with Nardi, who was playing alongside him. So if statistics are the main thing, then even DeMarcus Walker could be an option for them. But I think it's pretty safe to say that Myles Garrett's he and probably Leonard Fournette are the most talented players at the top of the board. That's what I would suggest. And Cleveland going with Myles Garrett would not be a surprise at all.
Well, let's just say, based on a lot of the names that you said, that if my draft happens, you'll be screaming at the television for the Seahawks to trade up because of these falling talents that are not in the top 5. One of those guys is not Leonard Fournette. Number 2 overall, the San Francisco 49ers select Leonard Fournette, running back, and a lot of people would be saying, what, they've got Carlos Hyde. They've got so many other players. They have so many other needs. Why would they pick a running back? Why would they pick Leonard Fournette? And this is going to be a theme of my mock draft. I think Ezekiel, you know how I feel, Rob, about drafting running backs earlier. I'm against it, but I'm trying to I'm trying to be unbiased. This is not my draft. I speak for the owners. I speak for the GMs. And I'm looking at it and I say, every single GM right now is thinking, where's my Ezekiel Elliott? Where's my Elliott? I got to have that guy. Then you look at it and you look at a lot of teams have needs at running back. And you look at it and you say that that they are going to, I think that they've got a class that is the best running back class in years. And I think that running backs will have a higher value in this draft than they've had in at least maybe 10 years is with the running backs, the way that they will be valued this year. So I think it's going to be a surprise, especially based on the last 8 or 9 drafts, how many running backs go early for that reason. And especially if Chip Kelly is with the San Francisco 49ers next year. He went out and he got DeMarco Murray for the Philadelphia Eagles. He traded LaShawn McCoy away. I think that he's going to look at Leonard Fournette. He's going to say, that's my DeMarco Murray. I think even if it's a different coach, I think that the GM, if it's Trent Baalke, will just be saying, why don't I just base my whole team around Leonard Fournette? They're not a very good rushing team, averaging just 3.9 yards per carry. I'm going to save the 49ers take Leonard Fournette. Why am I right or wrong?
Well, I think interesting point, Kenny, on the idea of maybe teams copying Dallas, because they've seen Dallas get a running back, be able to run with him and then get a quarterback later on. And while there are not maybe the quarterbacks in this class that you would necessarily take in the top 10, there are quarterbacks that could have some nice value. I mean, Dak Prescott was not a flawless prospect at Mississippi State. You didn't watch Dak Prescott and think, wow, this guy's going to go in the first round. That's why he lasted until the 4th. And there are 1 or 2 players in this class who could also provide that similar kind of, not necessarily in the 4th round, but can you get Deshaun Watson late in the 1st or early in the 2nd round, for example? Would you, if you were a team like San Francisco, could you take Leonard Fournette at 2 and get Deshaun Watson by trading into the late 1st? Is that a little pairing that you could get there that you could say, well, this is going to be our answer to Zeke and Dak Prescott? That would make some sense to me for a San Francisco team that has got no identity. All of a sudden, you've got a couple of options there you can build around. If you can put an offensive line that is serviceable on the field, then you've got a bit of an identity there. Can they get a receiver in free agency? Could they add someone like Deshaun Jackson, for example, who's going to be a free agent, just to offer something out wide, because they need that as well? So there is some method here that, you could understand. Plus, the other players that maybe San Francisco are going to be looking at, a defensive lineman. Well, they've taken defensive linemen in the 1st round in the last 2 drafts in Armstead and DeForest Buckner. They're going to keep drafting that type of player. Not necessarily. Do they need to focus on the offense? Absolutely. So I could definitely see somebody like Leonard Fournette going at number 2.
Well, if you thought that it was surprising that I put Leonard Fournette at number 2, given everything I've said about drafting running backs early, how about this? At number 3, the Jacksonville Jaguars select Dalvin Cook, running back out of Florida State. I look at Jacksonville. They've got their young edge rushers. They've got their safeties. They need offensive players. They need a running back. Maybe it's not the, TJ Yeldon. I've heard that, he's not getting a lot of a chance behind that offensive line, but they don't have any offensive linemen that they can draft this early. I think that after they fire Gus Bradley and they start over, they'll also be wanting their Elliott. They'll also be wanting their player to start around. They won't have to go too far to find Florida State's Dalvin Cook. What do you think?
It's interesting. I mean, it wouldn't be a total shock because Dalvin Cook's a really good player. But when you look at Jacksonville, they still have needs up front, on the defensive line for me. They've not created the kind of fierce pass rush that they were hoping to create. They have serious needs at safety and cornerback. And this is a really good draft for safety and cornerbacks. And they need offensive linemen. So, having taken TJ Yeldon in the second round a couple of years ago and having signed Chris Ivory to a big contract, to then bring in Dalvin Cook, you might just be sort of pushing your needs behind. And I missed the key need there, which is a quarterback, because it's quite clear this year that Blake Bortles is not the guy. I would suspect in this position, if Jacksonville had seen Fournette and Myles Garrett going with the first 2 picks, if they were picking at number 3, that they would take a long look at Jabril Peppers. I know that they spent a quite high pick on a secondary player last year, but that's still a big need for them. They don't have enough talent on the back end. And if they didn't like Peppers, well, there's other players they could look at. Marlon Humphrey, for example, Garion Conley, Justin Evans, Malik Hooker, although he said that he's not going to declare. So there's a lot of different options for them, but I would think that Peppers would be a really good pick for Jacksonville at this spot.
Interesting. I did have the Jacksonville Jaguars alternative as a quarterback, and it's just 4 years after they take a quarterback 3rd overall, they're taking another quarterback 3rd overall. I mean, you can't deny that if that's your need, that's what you have to go with. An unfortunate situation to have to constantly be taking that shot at a quarterback. And, who knows what they're going to do with Blake Bortles in the offseason. They're probably going to go 3-13 or something like that. Again, you think that they're going to fire Gus Bradley, stick with the GM Caldwell. Are they going to get in a quarter? I think they're going to, I would suspect that maybe they get a quarterback type coach to give Bortles one more chance. And maybe if they think that Cook is as good as an Elliott or as good as one of these guys, then maybe that is what they go with. Or if Trubisky is as good as people might think, if he's not quite good enough to get selected first or second, maybe some team trades up with Jacksonville in that situation where they do find themselves having a lot of other options that they could take. And that team might be the Chicago Bears. Picking 4th overall, the Bears select Mitch Trubisky, quarterback out of North Carolina, their most obvious need. It's, they're going to do what it takes perhaps to get a quarterback. If they're going to retain John Fox, they certainly think that that's a guy who could probably develop a quarterback, though I don't know what John Fox's chances are staying after this year. And my alternative for the Bears was Jabril Peppers. What are your thoughts on Trubisky fitting with the Chicago Bears? Because there's also been some talk that they're not giving up on Jay Cutler.
I don't think there's any reason for them to cut Cutler immediately. That's for sure. They might as well hold on to him until they know what their position is in the draft and in free agency. But I like the pick because I think that Mitch Trubisky is playing extremely well, and it's very hard to sort of pick flaws with his game. I mean, the one thing that he hasn't got is a ton of experience, but he has pretty much everything else. You see evidence of him going through progressions pretty quickly. You see him looking off safeties and then throwing guys open. You see him throwing the ball downfield. His footwork, his balance is terrific. I like his release. He's not Russell Wilson. He's not Dak Prescott, but he's mobile enough to scramble away from pressure. He will extend plays. He can extend plays and then throw on the run. He can make first downs with his legs. I think he was North Carolina's. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm fairly sure he was North Carolina's leading rusher in their recent defeat to NC State at the weekend. So he can make plays with his legs. He's just a really interesting guy. And the only knock on him is he's a bit of a 1-year wonder because this is his first year as a starter. And to go from that to the NFL, potentially starting very quickly is not ideal. But then Carson Wentz didn't play a lot of games at a lower level of college football before turning pro. So it's not always ideal. You can't always have the kind of experience that Jared Goff had. So I think it's a decent pick, and I think there's every chance that he could go this early.
It's a really interesting draft when you talk about offense and defense. When I looked at this mock draft and I was putting it together, I found myself so often saying, oh, this team needs an offensive player, and just not having it be there, and just seeing that all of the good players for the most part were on defense. Now that could cause some teams to overreach maybe on some offensive players, and some other defensive players that are really good to fall into the lower half of the first round. But after 3 of the first 4 picks in my draft being offense, it's going to be a lot of defense coming up. The New York Jets, that's what I'm saying. They don't I don't think they're going to go. I don't think they're going to go quarterback because they just took Christian Hackenberg in the second round. Is there enough offense? Is there any offensive linemen or wide receivers or running backs that you would draft here at number 5? I have Todd Bowles, the former cornerbacks coach. I have Darrelle Revis slipping. I'm taking the Jets. I'm taking Marlon Humphrey, cornerback out of Alabama. How am I doing?
Yeah, I really like Marlon Humphrey. I mean, he's had a great year. He kind of is the full package. You see some evidence of recovery speed. You see evidence of him being able to cover downfield. He has given up a couple of plays this year, but he's not going to be Patrick Peterson at the combine either. But at the same time, the NFL is looking for these big physical receivers cornerbacks who can, cover the big guys, cover and hassle at the line of scrimmage, that can tackle well. They're basically looking for Richard Sherman's, and Marlon Humphrey's big physical corner. What's going to be the key for him is that, can he run in the late 4.4s and really cement his stock in the top 10? Because if he runs in the 4.5s, there's going to be a chance that he maybe just lasts a little bit longer. But then Joe Hayden ran a bit of a sluggish combine and still went 7th overall. So, I think there's at least some chance that he's going to go pretty early regardless of that, apart from a complete catastrophe like a 4.6. But it's just a really physical, smart, creative player, makes really, exceptional plays on the ball at times, can high point, like I said, can tackle. It's just a really, really good player, and one of the more underrated players on that Alabama defense.
The Cincinnati Bengals are 3-7-1. I don't know what they're going to do with Marvin Lewis. He survived a 4-12 season not long ago. They keep on going back to him. It's just a relationship that apparently cannot be broken. But is it going to be the year that the Cincinnati Bengals finally move on from a head coach who has not won a playoff game in his 12 or 13 seasons that he's been with the team? It's pretty phenomenal. I admire their willpower. And I think the Cincinnati Bengals need to get back to playing defense. They just need to draft the best player available. It's not even a question. 6th overall, the Cincinnati Bengals selects Jabril Peppers, safety out of Michigan. And I had their backup as O.J. Howard, the tight end out of Alabama. Thoughts on Peppers? And, if they went on offense, could O.J. Howard go this early?
Well, the thing with O.J. Howard is he just has not. He plays in flashes. So you see in the national championship game last season, he took the game over, was superb, and then you sort of think, well, this is his year. He's not declared. He's come back as a senior. He's going to dominate college football. They need some playmakers on offense because they've lost a lot of guys, and he doesn't do it. I mean, they just don't use him. So the interesting thing throughout this draft process is going to be how the teams view it, because I would expect he's going to have a really good combine. The teams view him as a player who is never quite going to be that dynamic pass catching option, that he's going to be maybe better blocking in line and being a bit of a more traditional tight end as opposed to Rob Gronkowski. And if they believe that, then he's not going to go in the top 10. I mean, presumably Detroit, when they looked at Eric Ebron, for example, thought, this guy can be really creative for us. He could be a Jimmy Graham, he could be a Gronk, he could be a Greg Olsen type receiver. And it hasn't worked. So how do you view O.J. Howard? And I'm a little bit concerned for him at the moment that teams are not going to trust his ability to be an X factor in the passing game. I think if Peppers falls this far, it's a no-brainer. The only other name, if Peppers was already off the board, then the other name that I would consider at this point is Reuben Foster. They love their linebackers at Cincinnati. They love defensive linemen that are a certain type. They're like big, long, athletic defensive linemen. So someone like Tack McKinley could be an option for Cincinnati. But they also love physical, tough linebackers. And, Reuben Foster looks like he was born to play in the AFC North, and he would fit like a glove in that defense.
Yeah, we'll see where Reuben Foster lands here. Number 7, and this is the move that the Titans made. It's interesting because a year ago in the 2015 NFL draft, like I said, I was writing about the Giants and talking about Landon Collins. Landon Collins was the 33rd overall pick in 2015. The Titans were drafting 33rd overall. They traded down with the New York Giants to 40 overall and picked up a 4th and 7th round pick. The player that the Giants picked was Landon Collins, who very well might win NFL Defensive Player of the Year, and he's only 22 years old. The player that the Titans picked by moving down and picking up those extra picks, Dorial Green Beckham, who played 1 year for Tennessee and was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. The fourth rounder that they got was a fullback, and his name escapes me right now. But, whether or not he's the best fullback in the league, just a fullback, and certainly not worth passing up a Landon Collins for a Dorial Green Beckham. So no matter what Tennessee does with these trades, you would want to make sure that, hey, you can have all the picks in the world, but if you waste them, it won't really matter. The Titans did make a really good trade, it seems, by picking up the Rams' first-round pick from this year, as well as several other picks. So they, with that right now, because the Rams are losing so many games, 7th overall pick. It's a great opportunity for them to get a great defensive player. And I have the Tennessee Titans selecting Jamal Adams, safety. I'm just saying, just get a safety, get the best player you can get. Maybe the Tennessee Titans use some of those picks to move up and get Jabril Peppers if he was available. But I don't see playmakers in the draft being worth it at this point for the offense. I just see getting a safety. Can Jamal Adams fit with Tennessee?
Yeah, definitely. And, he'd be a nice little fit for them because, they've kind of got things sorted in offense. They could probably use another receiver at some point, but they seem to have some talent on offense and an identity, but they could use just a couple of extra pieces on defense. And, a stud safety is one of those. Adams is, he makes plays and he's around the ball and he's intense, and he's not Earl Thomas, but he's kind of in between, actually. If you were going to look at him, he's somewhere in between Jabril Peppers and Justin Evans. He's kind of a bit thicker than Evans, but not quite as big as Peppers is. Maybe a little bit more fluid than Peppers in coverage, but not quite as much as Evans. So he's kind of in between those two, and I think that he's going to go in the top 10. So this would be a good slot for him.
We talked about the Carolina Panthers and them coming to Seattle this weekend, and they have problems on offense for sure. But I think defensively, they've also got a lot of problems. They've got problems in the secondary. They've got problems at every level, and it's all being exposed this season for Carolina. And also the players that'll be going out. They don't have any pass rushers. They don't have anything really exciting on defense. Now that Josh Norman is left and Luke Kuechly is injured, and they've got some other good players like Thomas Davis and, developing players like Shaq Thompson, and obviously Kawan Short is a great player. But there's definitely going to have to be, just if you can inject a great player on your defense and you have that opportunity to do it, and a guy from Alabama falls down a little bit, why not do that? Carolina Panthers select defensive end Jonathan Allen. They've got no pass rush. There's no offensive lineman for them to take. There's not really anything exciting I have right here in another point. So it seems like a pretty good steal if they can get Jonathan Allen here for me. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I think it would be a steal for them. And you could see, they clearly put a lot of stock into their defensive linemen because, the one thing that Gettleman has done is almost neglect the secondary in favor of boosting that defensive line. So I think his first 2 picks were Starlo Tulele and then Kawan Short. They both had an impact there. They drafted Coney Ely in the second round, defensive end. They drafted Butler, the defensive tackle from Louisiana Tech last year this year in the first round. So another first round defensive lineman. They are pumping resources into that defensive line, and neglecting and linebackers as well. They've taken Luke Kuechly. They took Shaq Thompson from Washington. And they have Thomas Davis as well. So they clearly value the front 7 more than anything else. But if there was one counter to this, and Jonathan Allen's a fine player and would fit very nicely for them, it's that you've got Lotulelei, you've got Vernon Butler, you've got Kawan Short, you've got Coney Ely. If there's one thing they kind of need, it's either an edge rusher, someone who's maybe a little slight, a bit quick, a bit speedier off the edge. Which would lend itself maybe to someone like Tim Williams, for example, or they need to really bolster the secondary. I mean, that is where the needs are for Carolina. Their secondary is poor. They have major needs at safety. They have major needs at cornerback. And while this GM and this staff have kind of pushed that to one side, I think this would be the time to do it. This is the draft to do it. So I would probably, if it was me, be looking at guys like Malik Hooker if he declares, Conley from Ohio State, Justin Evans, the safety, Tre'Davious White, Cam Sutton, bit of a wild card, depending on how he tests, Obi Melifonwu that we talked about on last week's podcast, guys like that who can help them in the secondary. But if they took Jonathan Allen as well, I mean, you could argue it was sort of a best player available type of situation, similar to kind of when the Jets took Leonard Williams a couple of years ago or last year. They already had Sheldon Richardson, they had Mohamed Wilkerson, they still took another guy because they felt it was the best player in the draft, and there were some similarities between Williams and Jonathan Allen. So it would be a similar pick to that, so it would make some sense, but it would not be their biggest need.
Yeah, and then people are saying that Leonard Williams right now is, I mean, for a team that had some really great players with Mohamed Wilkerson and Sheldon Richardson, that Leonard Williams maybe is the star of that, that front right there. So it's definitely interesting, and the more of those guys that you have, it's not like it's not a bad thing. So, but at number 9, the Arizona Cardinals. Look how far the Arizona Cardinals have fallen, and the fact that the Seahawks play in the NFC West, and all 3 of their opponents are set to pick in the top 9, except for the Rams traded theirs away. I mean, look at how far the Arizona Cardinals have fallen. The Seahawks have the biggest division lead in the NFL, 3 games, because look at how bad these teams are right now. And the Cardinals just a year ago in the NFC Championship game, and they had everybody, there were people talking about Carson Palmer as the MVP, which is totally fair. I mean, the season that he had last year, absolutely an MVP candidate. And then just look how far everything has fallen. And Larry Fitzgerald is getting older, and Carson Palmer is getting older, and that team, I mean, in the tradition of the Cardinals, I mean, man, that team could go from, are they going to be on the top for the next 10 years to, are they going to be bad again really fast, really quickly? And look, I think that this pick, of all the picks that I made so far, and maybe the whole first round, I just feel a roasting coming, and I'm fine with that. We're finding it out. It's a very complicated year for offensive players, and even for defensive players, because there's different things that everybody has that makes them, maybe you'll value them. I think that some players could go high that will be shocking, and some low that will go shocking. And I just don't know how bad of a pick this is. But at number 9, the Arizona Cardinals select Mike Williams, wide receiver out of Clemson. Arizona has a terrible, terrible passing offense. Larry Fitzgerald is old. Michael Floyd's got to go. Then that leaves them with John Brown, who's not really going to be helping them. He's not going to be the focal point of their offense. So they got, they're still going to have Carson Palmer. They're going to could have Larry Fitzgerald. They're going to have David Johnson, but they need another weapon. And it's hard to say which wide receiver will go first or how early any of them will go. I think that a team could reach, but, I went with Mike Williams, and my backup was Deshaun Watson, because they got to do something at quarterback. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think they could certainly look at a quarterback, or they should be at least looking to draft a quarterback, because they need to develop somebody. I know they had the Logan Thomas experiment, didn't really work. I liked the idea of taking him and developing him, and then it obviously didn't work out for them. And now they kind of have nothing. They don't have a guy who is waiting in the wings. So they're either going to have to go out and get another veteran if they want to move on from Carson Palmer down the line, or they're going to have to start to consider drafting somebody. So this could be a slot where they do that. Mike Williams, interesting one, because for 2 reasons, really. First of all, I'm not sure whether he's going to be a scheme fit for Arizona, because one of the things that they've done since Bruce Arians came in is draft smaller, quicker, sudden receivers. J.J. Nelson, John Brown, Jerome Brown, they've kind of brought in smaller, quicker types. And the one thing that we know from Bruce Arians is that, he comes from that kind of Pittsburgh way of doing things. And, they had Antonio Brown and Mike Wallace. They didn't necessarily have bigger receivers in Pittsburgh. They had smaller, quicker receivers. And then when they went to Indianapolis for a year or two, T.Y. Hilton emerges on the scene. So that's kind of the Bruce Arians type of receiver. It is a smaller, quicker player. And for that reason, if they were going to take a receiver at this point, Kenny, I actually think they might consider John Ross at Washington, or they might move down and take John Ross, because he's one of the more he's going to be one of the, if he declares the draft, that is, he's going to be one of the more explosive players in the draft class. He's incredibly quick, could run a very quick 4-3, like a 4-3-2 or something like that. Has shown great adversity, great character, the kind of guy that I think Bruce Arians would like. He's been a touchdown machine for the Huskies this year. I think he's about 13, 14 touchdowns or something like that. So he's the kind of guy I could see them going for more than Mike Williams, just because of and I think the fact that they have Larry Fitzgerald and Michael Floyd, they were both there before Bruce Arians arrived. They've kind of gone away from that type, and I think that they would rather that. And let's be right here, they didn't even really use Larry Fitzgerald until last year. If you look at Larry Fitzgerald's production under Bruce Arians, in the first 2 years, I think, of him being in Arizona, it was terrible. And there was a lot of talk that he wasn't that happy with his role. And then it was kind of like just something changed all of a sudden, and they used Larry a lot more. But, they do like the quicker, smaller receivers there. As for Mike Williams, I see him getting sort of, a lot of people love Mike Williams. And I kind of understand why. You watch him against South Carolina at the weekend, 100 yards, 3 touchdowns. You watch him in the Pittsburgh game, had over 200 yards in that game. And there are certainly games where you just look at him and you think, yeah, this guy looks like the real deal. Great size, great techniques you'd expect from a Clemson receiver. Talks about coverage in a way that DeAndre Hopkins did. Very, very similar in that regard. Kind of pretty similar prospects across the board. And yet he has had some games this year where he's just not really been that great. From about after the first game against Auburn, he had kind of a long stretch without a 100-yard receiving game. And he had a lot of games where teams kind of handled him, or he wasn't making plays, or he kind of wasn't standing out. And, he's just over 1,000 yards for the year going into the conference championship games. He's only just over 1,000 yards when Clemson have got one of the more explosive offenses in college football. So I'm not convinced that he's quite as good as some people believe. I'm kind of seeing him as maybe an early second round pick. I know there are a lot of people that see him a lot higher than that, and I think what will determine it is the combine. Because if he goes to the combine and runs a 4.4 with his size, with his attitude, his mentality, his football IQ, there's every chance he could go as early as this. If he goes to the combine and runs a 4.5. Doesn't test that well overall, then he might be resigned to be more of an Alshon Jeffrey type range type of player. I think he'll have a decent career in the NFL. Don't think he's going to be a bad player at all at the next level, but it's just where he slots in a draft.
Any thoughts on why this will be the third notable wide receiver named Mike Williams?
I don't know. That's kind of strange, isn't it? Because you would imagine it's quite a common name. Mike Williams is kind of just like John Smith.
There was a left tackle named Mike Williams, but that's the only one that I can think of. It's 75% of them are receivers.
There are not many other names that are in the NFL that kind of keep cropping up. This is kind
Michael Bennett.
Michael Bennett's another one. It's kind of like Mike. Maybe Mike's quite a popular name amongst athletic families in the States.
Sometimes I think about too, like sometimes I'll be surprised when someone comes into the NFL. I'm trying to see if there's anyone on this list that is a good example. Tim Williams is a good example. Like I've never heard of a Tim Williams before. How did that escape us for so long that this is the first Tim Williams? Like these common names, but then other ones pop up. Like there's 2 defensive ends named Michael Bennett, and that's it. There was a running back as well before that. But when guys like, John Ross is somewhat common, Tim Williams, it's a little bit shocking to just Ryan Anderson is a good one. There's an NBA Ryan Anderson, but I think this is the first NFL Ryan Anderson.
Are all these Mike Williams? Are they like named after Michael Jordan or something? Maybe Tim Williams is named after Tim Duncan. I don't know.
There's an NFL draft prospect, and this is another interesting name thing that I saw today in doing my research. There's another NFL draft. There's a first NFL draft prospect named after a Wu-Tang Clan member. Do you know who that is?
I don't. No, who is it?
Raekwon.
Yeah, Raekwon McMillan. Yeah.
I'm assuming he must have been named after Raekwon from the Wu-Tang Clan. It's spelled the exact same. So That's interesting to see those guys. And it's the same thing with Shaq Thompson and Shaq Lawson. They were all born just about the time that Shaquille O'Neal came to prominence in the early 90s.
So it's all basically about the NBA or rappers, basically.
I'm sure that there are probably, I mean, at this point, there must be at least a dozen NFL prospects named Kobe. Can you think of any?
Oh, there's a few. I was just thinking if it's NBA and like and rap as well, then we've got Dre Kirkpatrick.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's anything. This is interesting. This is not going to help us finish this mock draft before.
Snoop Dogg, Calvin Brodus, Calvin Johnson. I don't know. Moving on then to number 10, and I love this pick, especially because I made it, but also it just seems to fit in every single way possible with the philosophy of the Indianapolis Colts, with their needs. I see Frank Gore leaving. I see a player from Stanford. I see a need for the Indianapolis Colts. I see a GM and a team that likes to get flashy offensive players despite a terrible defense. So I have the Indianapolis Colts selecting Christian McCaffrey, running back. It's a run on the running backs, the third in the top 10. What do you think?
I'll be a little bit surprised if he goes this early. I think that teams will like him though, because he's a big name player that people have kind of soured on, because that's what happens to big name players if they don't just keep constantly finding ways to impress people. So the thing with Leonard Fournette is that he's been injured a little bit and has only had one or two sensational games. And with Christian McCaffrey, it was that in the middle of this season, Stanford went on a big slump. He was also hurt, and people sour on him. But what you get from Christian McCaffrey is a really tough football player, more sudden than people realise, can be multifaceted. You could use him in the passing game, return game. He run it up the middle if you need him to. He's football 24/7. Mr. Serious about the game. Lunch pail to work type of guy. That's what he looks like. If there are some concerns, it is that he's incredibly muscular, and players like that tend to be more susceptible to muscle injuries because he's ripped. I mean, the guys must live in the gym. And the only other issue is that he's about 200. He's listed at about, I think, 205 pounds or something like that, which is kind of small for a running back. It's not the end of the world. I mean, he could probably add another 5 pounds and feel pretty comfortable at his weight in the pros. But how will he handle having that extra weight? That's something to be moderately concerned about. But I don't think he's going to go this early. I don't think we'll see 3 running backs in the top 10, but I think that McCaffrey's got a chance to go, certainly in the top 40, and would be a really good pick for a team like Detroit or Denver or somebody like that. He'd be great for the Broncos, and I think his dad played for the Broncos as well. So that might be a little reunion of the McCaffrey family and the Broncos there.
The Green Bay Packers have really fallen on hard times, and they are picking 11th overall. In my opinion, it's time to fire Ted Thompson, and I don't know if they're going to do. I don't think they're going to do that. But either way, I look at it, and they need to make Aaron Rodgers continuously look better. They need to figure out, give him more options to, protect him, but also to catch the ball. They had something going at one point for a very short time with Jermichael Finley that seemed like it could really work. We've talked about him already. So at number 11, the Green Bay Packers select O.J. Howard.
Well, one of the things that they really need to do is to get Aaron Rodgers some weapons, because you watch Rodgers at the moment, and it's clear that Jordy Nelson's not the same player. Randall Cobb has been hurt and just does not look as effective net anymore. Devontae Adams kind of pops up one week every 5 and does something. They need some weapons on offense. They need to help this guy, because that's how they're going to win another championship in the Rodgers era. That it's too late in the day to go there and say we're going to rebuild the defense and we're going to do all this and we're going to change the identity of the team. It's too late for that. Rodgers is. Anybody who watched the game last night against Philadelphia and just watch the guy, still the way that, he's sneaky in terms of how quick he is on those little bootlegs, and how he kind of gains 10 yards with just a little. He sees a little open crease and he's gone. And teams have to cover because he's so surgical with the passing game. So you see Philadelphia drop into coverage and try and cover everybody, and he just steals 10 yards. I mean, he is the way that they are going to win football games moving forward. So getting him somebody like OJ Howard would make a lot of sense. Finding some other options. I'd like to see, I mean, I don't care for the Green Bay Packers at all, and I have no reason to hope that they do this. But it would be really interesting to see them have a really proactive offseason. Go and make some moves in free agency. Go and bring some offensive pieces in there. Have a draft where they go with really exciting players, with the kind of explosive players, as opposed to these kind of like weird, bizarro picks they seem to make every year that don't make any sense. I mean, like Kenny Clark a year ago. I mean, Kenny Clark was okay, but he wasn't. You've just drafted a rotational defensive lineman with no like explosive, athletic profile, not particularly big or stout against the run, and you just take him in the first round. It's just a really strange, nondescript first round pick, and you see the results. The Green Bay defense is not very good. So yeah, I mean, I don't think OJ Howard will necessarily go this early, but that would make some degree of sense for the Packers.
Up next is the New Orleans Saints, and this is a defense that has not allowed more than 27 points since week 6. There's things that are starting to come together. Sheldon Rankins, the defensive tackle that they picked last year, who I think was maybe your favorite player in the draft. Keanu Neal maybe was your favorite, but you saw Sheldon Rankins as being this phenomenal talent, and he's come back in the last 4 games and put up 2 sacks. He had 5 assisted tackles 2 weeks ago. Then I look at the defense and you say, it's still bad. It's still really bad, but it's better, and you can't stop now. And if you've got a guy sitting there that is such a fit with everything that's living right down the street, why not just don't overthink it? I've got the Saints at 12 picking Tre'Davious White, cornerback out of LSU. You love Tre'Davious White. Here he is on a team that needs a cornerback. Tell me how I could possibly be wrong.
No, I think that Tre'Davious White is a good player. I think he's a really good player. Could definitely see him going as early as this. Good return man, amazing character, well respected by LSU. Does everything kind of well, and I think that his best football is to come as well. I thought he had a really good game against Alabama in a game that LSU nearly won. Easy to kind of forget that, while we're all caught up in how great Alabama are, LSU nearly won that game. And if LSU had any kind of an offense, then they probably would have done. So, and Tre'Davious White was a big part of that. So, yeah, I think he's a good player, underrated, and I think this could be a smart move for them.
My backup there, Tack McKinley, falling down the boards. We'll see where he goes. Some other guys falling down the boards probably for you would be Tim Williams, Reuben Foster, maybe Malik McDowell, and some other guys for sure that are falling down this board, and we'll see where they go. At 13, the Cleveland Browns, with their extra pick from the Eagles. A year ago, they opted not to take Carson Wentz. Whether or not they were regretting that right now, given that Carson Wentz looked so good in the beginning of the year and things haven't been going so well lately, how they regret that, it doesn't matter to me. I'm just looking at that extra pick and I'm saying, if you've got a quarterback who has been projected by a lot of people for a long time to be number 1, if he's still got some of that in there, if he doesn't ruin, if he doesn't show just terrible anything in the combine and the all of the other bowl games and blah blah blah, if he doesn't have a Matt Barkley moment, if he's just sort of looks like a really good player that maybe just doesn't look as franchisey as he did a couple months ago, screw it. This is your free play. You need a quarterback. You cannot go in next season with Robert Griffin III and Josh McCown and Cody Kessler. Just take Deshaun Watson. That's my pick at 13 for the Browns. Though I will say, with all the good players that I've listed as being available, maybe it would just make as much sense to just get a really great defensive player. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, maybe so, but Cleveland do need I think they need something. They need a reason to believe. Cleveland have just been so bad for so long now. I don't think they have any idea. I'll tell you what I think they need. They need an owner who gets it, who knows how to formulate a proper footballing plan and infrastructure, and then is willing to sort of treat this as a 5-year plan, because they just haven't had that. I mean, they're just an and just everything they do is a joke. So I mean, There's something like $60 million under the cap, or I think they might have to spend money to avoid sanctions because they're so underneath the cap. And yet they let Mitchell Schwartz just walk out the door, and they let Alex Mack leave the team. And, they had a good offensive line, and now they have a bad offensive line. They've just done so many things wrong, and then yet they do weird things like all of a sudden they've turned Terrell Pryor into one of the best receivers in the NFL, which is really strange. And I just, if they take Deshaun Watson, I would say, yeah, fine. You needed to make some kind of investment in a quarterback. But I would fear for him, and I imagine that his heart would sink a little bit being given the chance to try and turn around Cleveland, because it's just, and I feel for that franchise, because they look like a set of fans who would just, they stick by that team. And that was San Francisco, and no one would be ever watching them play. And yet there they are nearly every week thinking, this is the week we might win a game or whatever. And it never happens. So maybe he can go there and turn things around, but it's not likely.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this field of, college football day to day and all this kind of stuff. But I know that I can look at a lot of good college quarterbacks or great college quarterbacks that weren't great NFL players, and, vice versa. But Deshaun Watson, you got a guy who has played at a high level for, his entire career since he was a freshman. He has, come in and, although he's thrown some interceptions and, not had the best games every time, he always has to play in big games. He always produces. He hasn't had a real shitty season like some of these other guys, like a Cody Kessler or a Matt Barkley, at the USC, that sort of lost some of that stuff. So, if he continues to have, good interviews and good combines and a good postseason, all that kind of stuff, it could be a great steal for the Cleveland Browns. And definitely, unlike Brandon Weeden or Johnny Manziel or Brady Quinn, it just feels like a much better choice if they went with Deshaun Watson at this point. San Diego Chargers up next at 14. And you look at the San Diego Chargers and you say, man, this is a playoff team if they had played Joey Bosa from the beginning. Joey Bosa, arguably, not just the best defensive rookie in the NFL, but arguably, going to be a Pro Bowler at his position, and that's missing, the first 4 or 5 games. And I think they just need to keep on building that defense. They lost Eric Weddle. They could go anywhere pretty much on defense in the secondary. And I'm just looking at it, and I'm just saying, take Malik Hooker, safety, and start building from there. Does Malik Hooker fit with what San Diego wants to do?
Yeah, he would be a great pick for them. He's I mentioned earlier, he said in the last sort of couple of days that he, at this moment, fully intends to return to Ohio State. Whether things could change, if they won a national championship, for example, would he change his mind? Maybe feeling like he got nothing left to prove. If he sort of appeals to the draft committee and they tell him he's going to be a really high first round pick, would he change his mind there as well? Maybe. I just think he's a playmaker. And, he's another player that, he made a couple of mistakes against Michigan and people picked up on it. And, the broadcasters were talking about it. He took a really bad angle on one tackle and missed it. But that's, so does Earl Thomas does those kind of things. What Earl Thomas also did in college was have 8 interceptions and a couple of pick sixes in his final year before turning pro. And that, I think Malik Hooker has got 3 pick sixes this year, and I think it's 6 interceptions in total. So, with at least another game to come, because I suspect that, they've announced the top 4 while we were. They've announced the college football playoffs for this week while I've been doing this podcast, and they put Ohio State at number 2 again. And I think that the top 4, providing that Washington win the Pac-12, providing that Clemson win the ACC, and providing that Alabama win the SEC, which people expect, then the top 4, as is today, will be the top 4 going through. So he's going to have at least one more game in the playoffs, if not 2, if they get to the national championship. So he's got a chance to add to his tally there. And I do, he's not Earl Thomas, because, few people are, but he's kind of in the same, the same kind of mold, same kind of playmaker. And I would be very interested to see how his career is going to be at the next level.
The Tennessee Titans picked 7th overall because of their trade with the Rams. They picked a safety, Jamal Adams, so they got some defense. You mentioned offensive weapons, and I look at that and I say, Marcus Mariota is turning into a superstar in the NFL. He's got some decent players like Delaney Walker, but he doesn't have any great ones. And if he could add something else to hang his hat on, now we could really be talking about Tennessee as the team that wins the AFC South year in and year out, and they might do it, this year, and that's not too late. But man, if they had another player, then that would be even better. And I think it's time for Kendall Wright to go out, and it's time for John Ross to go in. So I've got the Titans at 15, picking wide receiver John Ross out of the University of Washington. What do you think?
Yeah, I like the idea, and big John Ross fan, and you think he's set for a very nice career in the NFL. Sort of looking at that team, what kind of a receiver do they like? Hard to say. They're using guys who are kind of mid-sized, not huge, not small. Tajay Smith, is it, or Sharp? Tajay Sharp, Rashard Matthews. They've kind of incorporated Kendall Wright grudgingly eventually, even though he's probably their most explosive receiver. Could they use a John Ross type? Absolutely. Would it maybe open up a new dimension to their offense? Yes, it could. So I think that this is a pretty good fit for them.
Quickly moving on. Sometimes my mock drafts go like this. That guy just sounds like a team that guy just sounds like a guy that team would like. That guy just seems like, when I picture that guy in that uniform, I see Pro Bowl, I see everything. I just see that it just feels right, and sometimes you got to go with your gut, but it's also pretty easy based on the fact that he's probably not going to go this low. So at number 16, the Baltimore Ravens select Tim Williams, the edge rusher. What do you think?
Well, Baltimore tend to draft players that I really like. So, I really, really, really like Tim Williams. I think he's going to go in the top 10. I think there's a chance he could go in the top 5. So if he lasts until 16, then yeah, it would be a no-brainer for them. I just think he's such a great player. I think he's shown this year that he's not just a dip-in speed rusher who plays passing downs. I think he's shown that he can be an all-round player. His work against the run has been superb. He has just impacted game after game after game, which is not easy to do because they rotate the guys on the Alabama defensive line so much. I just think that if you can get over, there are some character concerns, there are some maturity concerns with him. I think, decision making has been poor at times. It's got him into a bit of trouble. If you can see beyond that, and if you believe in him, and that's something that teams are going to have to decide as they do their homework, then he's a surefire top 10 pick for me. It's just whether or not those character concerns will send him down the board a little bit. But I think he is one of the best players eligible for the next draft. And I, as things stand, knowing what we know today, I would expect him to go very, very high in the draft.
Up next are the Buffalo Bills. I think Tyrod Taylor is a good player. I think LaShawn McCoy is a great player. I think Sammy Watkins is also a great player, the one that has been injured for most of this season. And, you cannot just rely on that and hope to be okay next year. So given that the Buffalo Bills are a pretty awful passing team overall, especially without Sammy Watkins when he's not in there, to the point where they had to try Percy Harvin, which is just a horrible disaster, and Robert Woods suffering injuries of his own. I had to reach for a wide receiver. I take Juju Smith-Schuster out of USC. It's just a wide receiver, and I didn't have any other wide receivers that I could tell even close to this range. We talked last week about D.D. Westbrook. It's just difficult for me to know what to do here if I really felt strongly about taking a wide receiver. So what are your thoughts on the Bills taking Juju Smith-Schuster?
He's not had the kind of year that people were hoping, and maybe part of it is the quarterback changes there, and they've mixed things around, but now that they've kind of found a guy in Sam Darnold, Smith-Schuster is still not producing at the kind of level we expected. He is part of the data that was included in the 2013 Nike Spark Combine, and his workout was not particularly great. So if he goes to the Combine and does a pretty average workout off the back of a disappointing season for USC, I can't see him going this early. I mean, I think the best case scenario for him, based on what he's shown this year, is round 2. I'm pretty sure that he's a junior this year, so it wouldn't be a total shock, in my opinion, that he might return to USC and try and go into the draft with a bit more momentum behind him. But you never know with these guys. You don't know what their situation is. You don't know if they're just eager to get to a second contract. You know, the sooner you get into the draft, into the league, the better chance you've got of maxing out your value with a second contract. That is when you're going to make your money now. It's not going to be with that first round contract. So you might feel like getting into the league's the best things to do. So for me, a second rounder at best today, and I think this would be a bit of a reach personally.
I don't have any other wide receivers in the first round. Do you have any other wide receivers ahead of Juju? I mean, it's fine if I'm sure you probably do, but if there was another wide receiver there, is there anyone closer to possibly going this high?
No, I don't think there's, in terms of high picks at receiver, I know there's some people like Corey Davis, who's at Western. I don't see anything particularly spectacular from him to warrant this higher grade. I don't think it's a year for, big name receivers to go in round 1. I think there's a pretty good chance that John Ross will be the only one. Maybe someone will emerge and sneak into round 1 as well. Mike Williams has got a chance, but it's a chance. It's not a surefire thing for me. But I think that John Ross might be the only one.
Number 19 or 18, the Philadelphia Eagles did get back into the first round by their trade with the Minnesota Vikings for Sam Bradford. It's turned out to be a brilliant move for the Eagles to not only, just start the Carson Wentz era right away. They did have to pay Sam Bradford $11 million just so they could basically get this first round pick back that they used for Wentz. But they're sitting here now with the Vikings out of the playoffs at this moment and picking 18th overall. And I've got them taking Dwayne Smoot, edge rusher. I think that in that division right now, you look at Dak Prescott, you look at Kirk Cousins, you look at even Eli Manning, and you say you got to be able to get to the passer. This is going to be a competitive division. So you got to have more defense. You got to have a pass rush. The Eagles need more of a pass rush by far. My backup was Justin Evans, and I think that as far as because there aren't any wide receivers really in this range, that a team like Philadelphia would be a great one to go after Alshon Jeffrey and try to attract that free agent. Should he become a free agent and not get the franchise tag. But I'm saying go out and get Alshon Jeffrey and draft Dwayne Smoot. There are other great defensive players on the board right now that maybe you'd prefer. What do you think?
I like Smoot. I know there are one or two people who are frequent the blog, the Seahawks Draft blog, a chap called Volume 12, who's not as keen on him as I am. But I do think that when you watch him sort of fire off the edge, he shoots out his stance like a cannon and, goes from 0 to 60 really quickly. And I just like that. I like that ability to sort of get through the gears as a pass rusher. And I think when you've got that ability, then as a coach in the NFL, you're thinking, get me that guy, let me work on his technique a little bit. Let me try and get the most out of this skill set. I do think that, Takk McKinley's still on the board. I just think that McKinley's there's a little bit of the Ziggy Ansah, sort of, raw, big guy, needs to really work on his technique, but has got, major athletic potential, probably did brilliantly at the combine. There's that kind of ability with Takk McKinley. And I've seen others compare him to DeMarcus Ware. I think that McKinley's going to go off the board in the top 10, top 12. So with him still on the board, I would have considered that as well. But, I do like Dwayne Smoot as well.
Well, number 19, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers do not have much of a pass rush at all, despite what happened against the Seahawks. They need someone like that. Takk McKinley, defensive end, goes to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's just the best move right now for Tampa Bay. If this was how the board would fall, do you agree?
Yeah, I think if he's still there at this range, you've got to consider it. And considering what the Buccaneers just did to the Seahawks with the defensive line that they've got already, the thought of putting Takk McKinley on the edge there with Noah Spence on the other side and Gerald McCoy working inside, that's a pretty scary proposition for any team that has to face Tampa Bay next year, which might be the Seahawks. If
Mhm.
Tampa Bay finish first in the NFC South and the Seahawks finish first in the NFC West, and they would play each other again next year. So
Mhm.
I would not look forward to seeing that personally.
Number 20, you're going to love and hate this. The Pittsburgh Steelers are on the board. They seem to always get lucky. You're going to think that they have gotten so freaking lucky right now. The Pittsburgh Steelers select Reuben Foster, linebacker from Alabama. He'll be the next great Steelers linebacker. James Harrison's going to be on his way out. The defense is terrible. Just take Reuben Foster and move on with your day. What do you think?
Well, I said that I think he's made for the AFC North. I think that the Steelers will be very lucky to get him here. In my last mock draft, I had Reuben Foster as the 6th overall pick to the Bengals, and I think that that's kind of the range he may well go in, because we're talking about a guy that he's just all around the field. I mean, as a blitzer in coverage, as a hitter, he hammers people. He has just got everything. I mean, the more you watch of Alabama, the more he just leaps off the screen and smacks you in the face. I mean, he is just, for me, a complete player, a player that you know that you're going to get your hands on and you're going to plug him in there and he's going to produce for you immediately. So if he's there for the Steelers this late, I would be surprised. It would be a tremendous pick, but I just think he's such a good player. And while the people will talk about Peppers being a potential Heisman candidate, and I guess he does do a lot of things on offense, special teams, defense, etc. Reuben Foster's just a terrific player, and for me, I would sort of give him some love in the Heisman race as well.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I think that the Heisman race should be wide open. I think there should be more defensive players up for consideration. Obviously, Jabril Peppers his chances took a hit with Michigan losing, but right now we got the Houston Texans at 21, and I think this is going to be an interesting pick. It'll be an interesting reaction. But I looked at the Houston Texans, just looked them over. They're not a team that I like. The signing of Brock Osweiler was definitely something I did not like and have been strongly opposed to from day one. Even before Brock Osweiler became a free agent, I said someone's going to make a mistake. And you look at them, and they're 32nd in net yards per pass attempt allowed, 31st in yards. They're worse at quarterback with Brock Osweiler than they were last year with Brian Hoyer and Ryan Mallett. And that's after adding Will Fuller in the first round. So that's what I look at them and I say, well, their offense is what they need to start working on. It's terrible. But they've got, they just added Lamar Miller. He's not doing too bad. There aren't going to be any offensive linemen here. DeAndre Hopkins and Will Fuller is somewhere to start. CJ Fedorowicz is an okay tight end. There's things to do there. The problem is quarterback. That's the problem. And I think that they still should bench Brock Osweiler. Forget the contract. It's too late. You already screwed up. And this might be, given the way that a lot of people feel about this guy, I'm saying, hey, maybe it makes some sense to start opening up the competition again with a first-round pick. Texans, Deshaun Kaiser, quarterback out of Notre Dame. It's a wild pick. People would say I was crazy. And maybe, I know you're not a huge fan of Kaiser, but some people have them up that high. Maybe there's another quarterback there that would be a better fit to be in a competition with Osweiler. Maybe they would take one in the second round. What are your thoughts on this wild move where the Texans take a quarterback in the first round? And even if you disagree, do you think that a second or third round guy might be there?
Well, I could see the Houston Texans taking a quarterback, because Brock Osweiler has been a unmitigated disaster. And, the last thing you want to do is just sort of stick by a bad move. Do the Houston Texans want to compete or not? And it's pretty clear to anybody who knows a jot about football that Brock Osweiler is not going to be able to lead this team to where it needs to go. We've seen DeAndre Hopkins' production drop off a cliff. Will Fuller's not producing. You put Will Fuller on you spent a first round pick on him. You're not getting anything out of Braxton Miller properly. You're not getting anything out of Jalen Strong. You've put all these weapons on the field. In running back, you spent big on a running back. You've done all of this, and you're being let down by a quarterback. When people talk about where could Tony Romo go, I think, wow, this would be a great place for him. Stay in the state of Texas, just move up the road to Houston. It's an AFC team. I'm surprised that more. Apart from the fact they'd have to pay two guys an awful lot of money, cut Osweiler, do what it takes, take the dead cap hit, because for God's sake, the guy is just not good. and go and get Romo. I mean, that would be what I would do, and I think that Romo would probably be up for that kind of a move. They've got a defense that plays pretty well. They've got loads of weapons on offense. So, I would think about doing that. If it comes to the draft, yeah, I would certainly consider doing it. And the thing about taking a first-round quarterback is that you can kind of play it by ear then. You don't have to start them straight away. It buys you a little bit of time as a coaching staff, because if you if you're sort of saying, okay, we've drafted this guy, but we're going to make it a competition, or we're going to give them time, then you could in camp make the decision to bench Osweiler, start the rookie. You could do it 6 games in, you could do it 10 games in, you could not do it at all. It would sort of put a bit of pressure on Osweiler. Maybe that'd be a good thing for him. So yeah, I could definitely see them taking a quarterback in the first round.
I'm looking at, the Washington Redskins up at 22. Scott McLuhan, he's and maybe McLaughlin, I don't know. He is, he helped build the Seahawks. He helped build the 49ers. He's done a great job with Washington. They're in position to get into the playoffs, perhaps. They've got huge question marks with what they're going to do with Kirk Cousins, who over his last, 21 games, it's been unbelievable. He's a passer rating of 108. Still have my doubts, but here we are anyway, and you can't really, we'll see what happens over the next 5 weeks. And, Kirk Cousins is either going to earn a lot of money or not, but don't let it distract you from the fact that the Redskins are 31st in the NFL against the run and yards per carry. They just need a guy who's going to stuff the middle. I've got Malik McDowell, the defensive tackle, going right here to the Washington Redskins. Is that a great pick?
I could see it. I mean, I think that McDowell is maybe he won't be the kind of character or, hard-nosed, tough guy that Scott McLuhan generally looks for. I mean, he's had a disappointment. I mean, Michigan State have had a major letdown this year. And he started the year well and then faded. And then you just don't hear people talking about him anymore. And that's a concern for me. And I think he sort of insinuated earlier in the season that he wouldn't necessarily declare unless he was a top pick. Well, you're not going to be a top pick based on what you've put on the field this year. So maybe he won't declare for the draft. Maybe he will come back and consider doing another year at Michigan State. If he does declare, I kind of think this could be the range where he goes. An inside-out rusher, with major potential and has got a lot of talent, but has not put it all on the field this year. Is that the type of player that Washington go for generally? I'm not convinced on that. I think they might look for players that are more zoned in. Could someone like Garrett Bowles, for example, be a good fit here? You could see Scott McLuhan liking him if he declares. Would they look at someone like Buda Baker? Yep, could definitely see that to play free safety. Would they look at Obi Melifonwu maybe to play some kind of safety position? I know they've got Sue Cravens there, but they kind of use him more as a linebacker. He could be a death backer for them. That would be an option too. And, cornerback could be an option. And, there are still quite a few that are on the board here in this mock draft. Conley's still on the board. Cam Sutton's still on the board. I could see him really liking Cam Sutton. Marshawn Lattimore still on the board. Quincy Wilson, Sidney Jones. Could see him liking Sidney Jones. So they'd have a lot of options here.
Yeah, I thought about Bulls for a while. I ended up just going this direction. But up next, the Miami Dolphins at 23. Surprisingly, they have just been on a roll, winners of 6 straight, come a long way from their 1-4 start, which included a loss to the Seahawks. But you look at loss at Seahawks, loss at Patriots, loss at Bengals, and a loss to the Titans at home, which is definitely disappointing, but they've won 6 in a row. And you might easily look at it and say, well, look, just make a better offense, keep getting better on offense. But it's like J.J. is, a great, doing great at running back, Jarvis Landry, Devontae Parker. They've got some stuff going on at wide receiver. They've got a great offensive line. Why not just keep on building up that defense? You've got some problems there at cornerback. So I've got them taking Garyon Conley at the cornerback, take the best defensive player available, perhaps, and just get better in the secondary. Is this a good range for Conley?
Yeah, I think this would be terrific value for Conley, who's got a chance to go in the top 15. This would be a really, really wise pick for them because that's kind of a need area for them. The secondary, they've patched guys in there. Byron Maxwell, for example, let Grimes go. They need some secondary players in there. So whether it's a corner like Conley or a safety like Melifonwu or Buda Baker or somebody like that, Marshawn Lattimore, Cam Sutton, that's the type of players they need. I will just say as well, they hit the jackpot with Adam Gase. I mean, you just watching the way that they compete and they don't give up, and this 6-game winning streak, which is, there's a romanticism, a romantic kind of nature to the way that they're winning these games. The fans are really buying in Miami. They sort of sense that something special is happening there. And it's kind of reminiscent slightly of the 2012 Seahawks. And I still don't trust Ryan Tannehill whatsoever to be a quarterback who can lead his team, into some kind of deep playoff run. But he could get them to the playoffs. And once you get in there, you just never know. And I just really, really respect Adam Gase as a coach. And I think that he's going to be a really good one for Miami.
The Detroit Lions are up next. You mentioned earlier whether or not Christian McCaffrey would be a fit for the Detroit Lions. Amir Abdullah is injured right now, and they've been working on some. They've definitely got a huge need at running back. And if you had been sitting here before maybe and said, "Hey, this guy's going to be available. This is a great pick," it would have been fine. And now I might get roasted for it, but I have at 24 the Lions selecting Nick Chubb, running back out of Georgia. They need to get a running back. He's not having the best season, averaging just 4.8 yards per carry in recovery from his injury. Was a much higher rated player as a freshman in 2014 when he rushed for 1,547 yards, 7.1 touchdowns in 14 or 7.1 yards per carry and 14 touchdowns. So a huge drop off there. And maybe this is early for Nick Chubb, but it certainly fit a need for me. And that's the direction that I went in. What do you think?
Well, 18 months ago, you would have expected Nick Chubb. I mean, Nick Chubb had the potential to go in the top 15, top 10. I mean, he was that good. And the way that he performed at the 2013 Spark Combine suggested that he was a rare athlete, just an incredibly explosive, fast running back with ideal size. The problem with Nick is that he just doesn't look the same player anymore. And, whether that's something that he can recapture down the line as he builds his strength with his knee and maybe takes time out at the end of the season to do that, because he really rushed back. I mean, it's quite an incredible fact that he was on the field in week 1 this year against North Carolina, and maybe rushed back to get back and play and prove to himself that he could do that. And credit to him for doing that, but maybe it's just maybe he needed more time, and maybe that wasn't the best thing to do. I can't see him going in the first round just because I think the injury risk is too much. And when you see guys like Miles Jack dropping into round 2 from, a perceived grade in the top 10, Jalen Smith doing the same, it's hard to imagine Nick Chubb after this injury and what we've seen on the field this year is going to go in the first round. I think there's a chance that he could even drop into the third. I sincerely believe that if someone takes a chance on him, they could be handsomely rewarded in a way that teams were when San Francisco drafted Frank Gore in round 3, or way back when. He had a very serious knee injury as well, and returns to have an incredibly long, punishing, physical NFL career, very productive as well. Mm-hmm. So you could get that kind of value from Nick Chubb, but I think that that's going to be the kind of range where teams take a gamble on him.
Up next, the Denver Broncos. You'd look at the Denver Broncos and say great defense, bad, not that great of an offense, go offense. Not me. I think they look at it and they say they're going to keep on pumping up that defense. They're just going to make it better and better and better. And I had the best player for Fs as a pass rusher, the Denver Broncos selecting Derek Barnett. Would you say that is maybe the best player up on the board? And do you think it's a bad idea to go defense again?
I think this would be an ill fit for them because, they have Wade Phillips as the defensive coordinator there, and he's very much a 3-4 guy. And Derek Barnett is very much a 4-3 guy. So, he's not going to be a 5 technique in a 3-4, and he's not going to be an outside linebacker. So it would be, for schematic reasons, I think they'd be more likely to look at someone like Charles Harris or maybe even Carl Lawson, Alex Anzalone maybe, if they were going to take an edge rusher. That said, Derek Barnett's a very good player. I think he's got 12 sacks this year. He's not going to be the best tester at the combine, but in terms of heart and ability and technique and just natural ability to get to the quarterback, there's possibly nobody better than him. I've had him at 15 in my in the mock I did this week, so it'd be good value. But I think the one thing that Denver need more than anything right now is potentially a running back, and maybe, well, not maybe, they definitely need better offensive linemen, because the offensive line is just not good. So I could see something like Garrett Bowles being an option here.
Yeah, that's why I think Garrett Bowles will probably, if he's as good as, if he ends up being as good as you say, as a prospect, which, a lot of other places are not putting him up in the same atmosphere as you are yet. But if he ends up being that good, there's no way I think he makes it this deep, because the first team that has a need offensive line, which is a lot of them, is probably going to grab him. So moving on to the Atlanta Falcons, we talked about the fact that Desmond Trufant just went on, injured reserve. Robert Alford is 28 and I think about to be a free agent. They could add any wide receiver if one was available, but I think they're going to have to look in free agency. I'm just looking at cornerback, and I'm looking at Dan Quinn, and I'm saying keep on building that secondary, get more depth. And I thought that the best player available at this point was Quincy Wilson. What do you think about the Falcons taking Quincy Wilson here?
Yeah, Quincy Wilson's a good player. He's had a solid year for Florida. There's some debate as to whether Jalen Tabor or Quincy Wilson is the better cornerback. But I think they're both pretty good. Marcus May is a really good safety as well. Anzalone and Davis inside, two good linebackers. Caleb Brantley, good defensive tackle. Nice. So there's a nice supporting cast. They're the big names, but there's a nice supporting cast as well at Florida. Would Atlanta go for a corner? Maybe. I'm not. I know that they took. What's his name? The guy that I really liked.
Keanu.
Not just Keanu Neal, but the cornerback, Jalen Collins, was it?
Oh yeah.
They drafted him as well. They have Trufant. A cornerback could be an option for them. I think that with it being, if Dan Quinn has carried any of the philosophy with the Seahawks, they'll want to draft their own and develop these guys later on. But I think that their biggest need is still defensive line, and finding more and more pieces to sort of to go with that, because Dan Quinn's a defensive line coach. They got Vic Beasley. They've signed some free agents that are kind of hit and miss up front. If I was the Falcons, I'd want to see them continuing to sort of pump up that defensive line, and there are still one or two good guys now. I don't think DeMarcus Walker's off the board yet. I mentioned one or two of the others: Carl Lawson, Charles Harris. I think they're sort of the two bigger names that you would sort of consider that are still there. I know a lot of people like Solomon Thomas, Caleb Brantley, people like that, Derek Nardi. So, there's a few defensive linemen they could also look at there.
There are 6 picks left in the first round, and for those of you who've been sitting around waiting for the Seahawks or whatever, here we are at the Seattle Seahawks pick. I did not want to go with Garrett Bowles because we've talked about that. So, we're not necessarily just trying to get it right, or I'm not. Or whatever. It's not necessarily the best pick here for the Seahawks, but we'll see. And I think it's an opportunity to talk about other guys that may be available or maybe fits. To me, when I look at the Seahawks, obviously that they have a need on the offensive line. I think they would still try and go, if not using a first-round pick on a guy they really like. And I think at that point they'd probably trade down. There's a lot of guards that guards especially that I see other mock drafts putting in the first round that Rob, you haven't even really touched upon that much in this show. And I think that that's something else to consider once the draft gets closer. We'll see how things really shake up. For me, I still think that the biggest need is going to be defensive tackle. Yes, they've got Jaron Reed that they took last year. They've got a Tiba Rubin on a contract. They're working with, Tony McDaniel, and, we'll see what Quentin Jefferson's future looks like. And there's definitely plenty there. But to me, it's like they still are looking for someone else with Reed to just be like, these are our 2 guys for the next 6 years, and we're going to be fine, because they keep on rotating these guys in and out. They get injured, whatever it is, it's just not working. So for me, I went with Caleb Brantley out of Florida. He's got, the size, 6'2" to 300 pounds, 14 games, 8.5 tackles for a loss, 1.5 sacks, but the numbers aren't necessarily just it. You love Florida's team a lot. You love how many, you love a lot of the players on there. So tell me why I did good or bad choosing Caleb Brantley here.
Well, let's start with what Caleb Brantley does well. There was a play against Florida State where he kind of just, he gained initial leverage, great first step quickness, shrugged off the center and just exploded into the backfield and got a splash play. And that's what he's really good at. There was a game against LSU recently where he just, again, exploded off the line, got into the running back. It was Geis, I think, not Fournette, who fumbled. It might have been Fournette. I'm not sure. I can't remember which one it was. But he kind of exploded in there, got a big paw on the football, managed to dislodge it on the goal line. A really tremendous play. I think he may have had a sack in that game as well. And there are times when you kind of watch Florida, and there's certainly been times this year when I've been focusing on Anzalone or Davis or Marcus May, and then you're watching the play and you're not even intending to watch Caleb Brantley, and he will be the one who makes the play, and you think, yeah, do you know what? He looks really good. The only problem is that when he isn't sort of making those splash plays, he's not not what I would consider a consistent player. So you're not seeing, a terrific anchor against the run. You're not seeing him, just because you're not going to win immediately with a swim rip every snap. You're not going to, penetrate into the backfield on every snap. So you kind of want to see sometimes a guy who just sort of plants his legs, shoves the guard into the backfield, makes the quarterback, move off his spot, get him on the run, maybe force him to run into the arms of a defensive end. That's the kind of thing you want to see. You just want to see them doing the meat and potato stuff as well. And with Caleb Brantley, you don't always see that. So on the, I for example, I don't think he's as consistent as Jonathan Bullard was a year ago, or as physical, or as intense as Jonathan Bullard. And Bullard went in round 3. And there's a lot of talk that Bullard might sneak into the first round or at least go in the second round. And he lasted well into round 3. So I don't really know what to expect from Brantley because, Bullard tested really well at the combine as well. And you kind of think, well, if he's a 3rd round pick, what's Caleb Brantley? Because I could see him going in the top 32, but then I could also see him going in the late 2nd, or I could see him going in the 3rd. So I don't really know where to place him, and I have real trouble placing him. And it's kind of like I don't feel confident either way in sort of knowing what he is. And there are certainly, I think compared to Derek Nardi, and the two played in the same game at the weekend when Florida played Florida State, and I thought Nardi overall was having the more consistent game, and then had the big impact at the end of the game, whereas Caleb Brantley had a decent start and then faded out. And I know that's something that's also a concern with Brantley, that people have questioned his motor and whether he can play a lot of snaps. So there are a few things to consider there. I agree with you, Kenny, that the defensive line has to be some kind of looked at, because for starters, they were giving up, I think it's something like 80. I wrote this down in the blog earlier in my post about Nardi, that I think they've gone from giving up 82 yards per game in the rush, to which was the first overall, it was number 1 in the league, to 100 yards exactly. I think it's like 100.2 yards per game, which is 14th in the NFL. So 14th in the NFL is average. It's in the middle of the pack, but that's a considerable drop from number 1. So losing Brandon Mebane, first of all, has had it seems to have had a big impact on their rush defense. Plus, also they have lost, and this has kind of quietly gone unnoticed, they've lost the interior pass rush production that they had in 2013 and 2014. So Clinton McDonald had 6.5 sacks in 2013, Kenny, and Jordan Hill had 6.5 sacks in 2014. So whatever your thoughts on Clinton McDonald and Jordan Hill, between them, they combined for 13 sacks in those 2 years. Last year, Jordan Hill had 0 sacks. And this year, who's got your interior sacks? I mean, I think Jordan Reed's on like 1.5 for the year. Has Ataba Rubin got a sack? Has Tony McDaniel got a sack? I'm not too sure. Did Quinton Jefferson get one when he was healthy? Has John Jenkins got one? Has DeMontre Moore got one? These guys have not produced sacks. And I think they really, really want someone who can do, I don't think they expect Aaron Donald. I don't think they expect 10 sacks. I think they want 5 or 6 from the interior. And they don't have that right now. So I think they are going to look for somebody, whether it's the first round, whether it's the second round, whether it's free agency. I'm almost convinced they are going to look to add somebody who can rush from the interior. And that could easily be their first round pick next year.
Yeah, 1.5 sacks from Reed, half a sack from Moore. I know that it's hard not to love what Moore has done in a short amount of time. The guy's only 24 years old, but hasn't been healthy the last week, and there were reasons that he was available. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Moore. But I mean, I definitely think that it's something that they would love a lot. I think that getting out there and finding their own, because even the teams that seem to beat them consistently are the ones that have Aaron Donald or Geno Atkins or Kawan Short or one of these great pass rushing interior defensive linemen. So it's something that they'd probably like for themselves. As opposed to that, I did also, my backup was a bit of a wild card. It didn't have to make sense for me. It just had to be something to talk about. And then to me, like, the backup was something. The other pick that I had for them that I mulled over for a little bit doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, but I want to talk about it, which is, why not just stay right where he is and choose Budda Baker if you've got a great player that's available at the end of the first round? The fact that your old Thomas has only missed one game in 7 years, and it's not really a concern at free safety. I don't know. If you feel really comfortable with how good your team is, maybe you just pick a really good player and figure it out as you go. That philosophy doesn't seem to work very often, but I did it anyway. How ridiculous is Budda Baker to the Seahawks?
No, I don't think it's ridiculous. And the Seahawks have done kind of two things really from previous history. They've attacked their needs. Whether it's 2010 going for the tackle and the safety, which they wanted to do a playmaker in the second round, which was Golden Tate. They got Charlie Whitehurst and even a quarterback for competition, so they used the third round pick on him. Wanted to improve the run game 2011, so take Carpenter and Moffitt. Wanted speed in the front seven, so the following year, so take Bruce and Bobby Wagner. There was consistently sort of just going for the best players available. Then change, not the best players available, sorry, the attacking their needs aggressively. Then the following year, it was a shift. So they kind of went, okay, these are the prospects available. None of them are really exceptional prospects in terms of grades. We can go and trade for Percy Harvin. So they go and do that. Was Harvin a massive need, or was he a luxury? He was a luxury. I think it's fair to say. In the second round, they took Kristen Michael, which was another luxury pick. Incredible athlete, major upside, bit of a character risk. They went and took him anyway because they felt comfortable doing that, even though they had Marshawn Lynch, even though they drafted Robert Turbin. They still went and took Kristen Michael. He was essentially the number 3 running back on the roster. They took him in the second round. And then the following year, they take Paul Richardson. Again, was receiver a massive need? Was a receiver like Paul Richardson a massive need? Not necessarily. Was Justin Britt a big need? Yes, he was. They needed to get an offensive lineman, so they took one. And then, as you go along, Frank Clark, a nice complementary piece. Was he the best player available? Probably at the time. Yes, he was. Was it an absolutely stonking, we've got to get this need filled? No, it wasn't. And yet Tyler Lockett was a big need because they wanted to dramatically improve their special teams production, which had taken a dip the previous season. And then it brings you to 2016 when they go after needs again with the Feddy, and then Jordan Reed. It was kind of a combination of best player still on the board and a bit of a need inside, having lost Brandon Mebane. So they've kind of done all of the things you've talked about there, Kenny. And as long as they felt they could fill their needs later on, I could see them going for Budda Baker. And the great thing about this draft is that the Seahawks are probably going to be on the clock at some point. And you're going to say, and if you could just sort of pause time and spend, if we could just get them to stop the draft for an hour in New York, Kenny, and me and you could come on and do a podcast and say, right, there's these 10 players available. We could probably make a case for how exciting it is to draft any of the 10 that we were going to talk about in that hour podcast. That's how good it's going to be. And, like someone like Budda Baker would be right up there. You could use him in the slot. You could use him as a sort of just an extra player in nickel. You could use him as a backup safety for Earl Thomas. You might be able to use him at corner. He's a very versatile player. I actually think I'd be surprised if the Seahawks don't tap into what Chris Peterson is doing at Washington. I think that there's a mutual respect between the two teams. I think that there's an appreciation for both of the colleges actually in Washington, Washington and Washington State as well. Carroll referenced that recently. And I think that they will take players from both schools. And, Buda Baker, whether it's John Ross, whether it's one of the defensive linemen, whether it's Kevin King, whether it's Sidney Jones, whether it's one of the linebacker, whatever it is, whether it's the safety at Washington State, they're going to take players from these two schools, I suspect. So
Yeah.
I think that Buda Baker would be a possibility and would fit right in with the Seahawks, but then so many players would. That's the beauty of this draft class.
Yeah, before the Apple Cup, Pete Carroll said that he had watched a lot of Washington State, and it'll be interesting what that means, if anything, next year. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see. There are a lot of players that are left on this board that are probably blowing, if for those that would know the players that you like, and that, I mean, I have just a long list of players that I didn't even put in the first round that are probably just bananas that should belong in the first round, or will fall to the Seahawks anyway, because there's it's a deep class, though it's not deep at some of the positions that teams may really need. As we get close to our 2-hour limit on the show, we'll try and get through this quickly. At number 28, the New York Giants, I have selecting Carl Lawson. You've mentioned him several times. I think Jason Pierre-Paul could be leaving. They only signed him to a 1-year deal, and he's having a monster season. I don't know how they sign him with all the other contracts they signed. So the Giants taking Carl Lawson. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, like Carl Lawson has had a very good year. I wanted to see more from him against Alabama. I thought that was a big opportunity for him to sort of prove to everybody he's a first-round pick. He's had some really big games this year. Could have had even more sacks. There's been a lot of uncalled holds on Carl Lawson this year. Has still had a pretty good season. He seems to have put the injuries behind him, and if he tests well at the combine, there's every chance he will go in round one.
The Kansas City Chiefs are up next, and while their offense, has problems for sure, Alex Smith averaging just a touchdown per game. If there's a chance that Eric Berry leaves, then I think safety is going to be a need, obviously. And Buda Baker being available here seems like a good fit for me. You just talked about Buda Baker, so he makes sense with the Chiefs, right?
It does if Eric Berry leaves, and maybe they would look at somebody like that anyway for the same kind of role that we've just talked about. Maybe it would free up Eric Berry actually to do a lot of different things, because he's capable of playing a multifaceted role, whereas Buda Baker is probably a free safety. And they've got Ron Parker that's kind of the strong safety. So Eric Berry could be used in a lot of different ways. But I think that they will, if the Chiefs allow Eric Berry to leave Kansas City, it would be one of the biggest mistakes they've ever made. So I can't quite see that. Yeah. So that would maybe, I would imagine that in this scenario, they might look at inside linebacker and might look at Jared Davis.
The New England Patriots just gave Marcus Cannon $32 million. I believe that they've got Sebastian Vollmer. I believe that Nate Solder is a free agent, and it just seems like a Bill Belichick thing to do, take an offensive lineman. So Garrett Bowles to the Patriots. I'm sure you think that's a great value, right?
Yeah, I think that Garrett Bowles, when all is said and done, could easily be a top 10 pick. I mean, he's the best defensive tackle in college football. He's got a great backstory. He's moved on from some of the troubles in his life and now has tremendous character and is a family man, is expecting his first child. He's going to be a credit to any organization who drafts him. There's only really one downside, and that's the fact that he will be 25 next year. But if you're a smart team, and smart teams will observe the struggles of the offensive line across the league, especially left tackle, you will look at this guy and say, I need him on my team. So I think he's going to go. I've been mocking him to the Seahawks, and I feel comfortable doing that for the time being, because nobody else puts him in their first round mock drafts, and nobody else really talks about him. So if people aren't going to do that, then I'm going to put him to the Seahawks and assume that they're smarter than everybody else. But I suspect if he declares, it's not 100% that he will. I think he should, because he's going to be 25 next year, and it would serve him no benefit to sticking at Utah in front of the year and being 26 when he goes, into his first year in the NFL. So I would, if he does declare, I think he will be a top 15 pick and possibly top 10. Is that good?
It's I mean, it's got to be alignment at some point. It's crazy to think about the Oakland Raiders not picking in the top 5, but it looks like they'll definitely at least be picking in the 20s. And I hear they're just, based on record right now at 31. And I just said, got to get a corner. So I picked Cam Sutton. Is he the best corner available?
Yeah, he might be. I think I have lost a little bit of track of who's gone and who's not, but I
Yeah.
think that I love Cam Sutton. The only reason I think he might not go a lot earlier than this is because of the injury situation and the supreme depth at quarterback. I mean, there's just so many good corners, so that might work against him. But he is such a talented player with length, athleticism. He's a terrific leader. He's going to be a captain on your defense. He's just a great player. So yeah, this would be great value.
Last pick, Dallas Cowboys. My only note for the Cowboys was any defense. They need a pass rusher. I don't know who the best pass rusher is available at this point with my board. I just picked Ryan Anderson, linebacker. How do you feel about that?
Well, I love Ryan Anderson as a player. You know, he's not the biggest player. He's about 6'2", 235 or whatever. He's not got the length. I don't think he's going to go to the combine and turn it on. But the guy just makes plays and just does it over and over and over again. There hasn't been a game this year when he hasn't had a big play for Alabama. And when he's not the one recording the stat, he's usually the one who creates the stat for Tim Williams or Jonathan Allen. So he's had an amazing year. Whether he goes this early or not, I'm not sure. I mean, I think DeMarcus Walker has just been a revelation this year. I mean, it's just if DeMarcus Walker is not in the top 15 or 20 picks, then I don't really know what teams are looking for because if people look at the sack, if you go on Rob Rang's Twitter account, because Rob put a video of this on his timeline over the weekend. If you kind of scroll down Rob Rang's Twitter timeline, you will see a video that he took of DeMarcus Walker's first sack in the game against Florida. This was in the fourth quarter with the game on the line, and he beats the tackle on the guard, whoever he faces at the line of scrimmage. He beats him with speed and technique. So he swims away from the blocker and beats him with speed, and then the running back. And I think it's a pulling lineman or it's a running back and a tight end. It might even be the running back and the fullback, are both in his way. And he kind of just barges past them both. I mean, just like, get off, just throws them off and gets to the quarterback. It is one of the best sacks. I mean, nothing's going to top Jonathan Allen's Superman sack from earlier in the year. But this might be the second best sack you see all year. He's just an incredible player.
Yeah, so that's the 32 players I had here. You mentioned a couple guys that didn't make the first round. I'm just going to quickly run through a list of names that I didn't put in the first round for no really great reason that are compiled from your mock drafts, but also other mock drafts that you may disagree with just to a certain extent. And so I'm just going to run through this quick. And if any names pop off at the end in your mind that you want to mention, then we can talk about them briefly. Obi Melifonwu, Gerard Davis, Sidney Jones, Marshawn Lattimore, Alex Anzalone, Jalen Tabor, Solomon Thomas, Zach Cunningham, Taco Charlton, Dan Feeney, Dorian Johnson, Ryan Ramchick, Lowell Lotulelei, Adam Biznawadi, TJ Watt, Adoree Jackson, Carol Phillips, Desmond King, Quentin Nelson, Marcus May, Julian Davenport, Ethan Pochik, Pat Ifine, Alvin Kamara, Royce Freeman, DeMarcus Walker, and Justin Evans. So that's a list of guys that I've seen in first rounds around the internet a little bit. Any of those names pop off? You've talked about Walker, talked about Evans, talked about Obi and Davis. Any of these other guys?
I love the potential of Melifonwu, and I do think Justin Evans will go in the first round. I don't think Posick or whatever how you pronounce it at LSU is. I think he's majorly overrated. I think Elfline at Ohio State is equally overrated. I don't see those two going early. I do like Dorian Johnson. I do like Adam Biznawati, but I'm not convinced that they're first round type guys. I think Johnson could find a home in round 2. I think Biznawati is going to be round 2, round 3, round 4 type range, depending on how he tests.
What about Adoree Jackson?
Adoree Jackson, incredible athlete, but what is he? I mean, like, is he a cornerback? Is he a wide receiver? I still don't think we know that answer. I think if a team could get hold of him and turn him into a receiver, then he could be a little sparky player for them. But what is his ceiling if he does that? And if you try him at corner, is he going to nail down the technique? Is he going to be more than just an athlete? I know a lot of people like Adoree Jackson because he is so explosive, but I just, what is he? What, and how early can you take a guy like that without like a defined position at this stage in his career? So I still think he's probably a round 2 type guy. But a lot of people like it.
You hear a lot of people trying to push a certain guard or tackle into the first round that you just think is ridiculous?
Well, I see a lot of things for Ramchick you mentioned there, and I've watched him. He's neat and tidy. He's fine. He's perfectly fine. I don't see anything that kind of leaps out at me and says I have to take this guy in the first round. I kind of feel that Ramchick benefited a lot from Pro Football Focus, mentioning within about 3 or 4 weeks of the season starting that he was their best run blocking or pass protecting tackle in college football. And in a year when people were desperate for anybody to put in a mock draft who plays offensive line, suddenly Ramchick was getting praised and talked about all the time, and I think that maybe made him a little bit overrated. I mean, he's not a bad player by any stretch, but I don't think for me, he's not a first round type player at the moment. I mean, if he goes to the combine and proves me wrong, then I'm willing to move my position on that. But at the moment, I don't see someone that I would expect to go in round 1. If you just throw a few more of those names at me, Kenny, and there was 1 or 2 interesting names on that list that I know we haven't talked about recently.
Yeah, let me do that. I just closed it, but here it's back up. Taco Charlton.
Yeah, Taco Charlton's an interesting player because I know a player that a lot of people like and will have seen him making a big impact for Michigan this year. I like him and I like Worley who moves inside. The only thing with Taco Charlton is that there are things to like about him and there are things to dislike about him. And there are things about, in his previous career, he didn't really have an impact at Michigan. Has he really turned it on because he knows this is his opportunity to do it now before going pro? There are 1 or 2 things that I'd be a little bit concerned about, and I want to see him test, but he has the size and the pass rushing ability to be a really effective player at the next level.
And do you want to quickly talk about just the last thing to talk about maybe in your recent article about the Seahawks and their mock draft, just your second round picks between Dalvin Tomlinson and Derek Nandi?
Yeah, well, if people want to see the 7-round mock draft projection that I've put out for the Seahawks, that I've tried to sort of look for Seahawky type players. Now, I understand that some of the names I put in this list are probably not going to last as long as I've got them. So I have Shalom Luani, who's the safety of Washington State, and people are talking about him as a potential day 2 pick now, or a early day 3 pick, and I've got him in round 6, which might not be likely, but I wanted to sort of highlight names that Seahawks fans could watch or sort of look out for. And it's very difficult to sort of nail down round 6, 7 picks for the Seahawks because, generally they're players that they're priority undrafted free agents for the Seahawks. That's kind of how they approach it. And we can't really get into that to the combine. So in, round 1, I put Garrett Bowles there. Round 2, Tomlinson has just gone through a lot of adversity, and his dad died when he was very young. His mum was his rock. He's very close to his mum, and she died in 2011, and it left him heartbroken. And he's kind of playing at Alabama for her, in her memory. He's an incredibly well-spoken player, but he looks like a grown man and he plays like a grown man on the field. And I don't think, maybe he's a little bit too similar to Jaron Reed. Maybe he's not quite the pass rusher the Seahawks need. But I like so many things about his game, and I like his toughness, and I like the fact that he's from the Alabama system. He's also a very keen artist and a musician. I think he's a drummer. So I think he can play 3 instruments, actually. I think he can play the trumpet as well and another instrument. So that sort of musical side to him would appeal to Pete Carroll. So he's at Alabama. It's someone maybe that people want to check out. Derek Nard, who I've written about today, could be a first or second round option because he benches 525. He can squat like 750 pounds. You just look at his lower body, and it's incredible. He's a mountain of a man. Really squatty frame, but just enormous, just huge legs, and just generates so much power. I've written a piece about him on Seahawks Draft Blog this week. Go and check it out. Go and see some of the video clips on there. Go and see some of the things that I'm watching with this guy. He's had 5.5 sacks this year, 9.5 tackles for a loss, playing defensive tackle. Really explosive, powerful guy. Is going to be stout against the run. Will soak up a double team in terms of blocks, but we'll also have that, ball rushes guys into the backfield, moves the quarterback off his position. He will just shove a guy out the way with one arm and then explode and get to the quarterback. Him and DeMarcus Walker have just been a terror all year. And Jimbo Fisher loves this guy. He's the head coach at Florida State. Just loves Derek Noddy, and it's like trying to encourage him and trying to push him. Like, you could be even. You don't know how good you could be. And I kind of love that about him. He's playing so well, but there's still so much more to come from him. And he's not Kawan Short, but I just wonder if he could be like a similar production type guy at the next level. Just a really, really fun player to watch. So I would highly recommend checking out Derek Noddy when he has his bowl game later in the year. And just a couple of other names to mention. Hassan Reddick at Temple apparently can run a 4.47 at 6'1" and 235 pounds. Apparently can do a nearly 11 in the broad jump. Apparently can do a 36 in vertical. Those are all things that will make him spark to the nines. He's got 21.5 tackles for a loss in 12 games, which is incredible production. 9.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles. He's a hybrid defensive end linebacker. He's kind of like a Sam Leo type player. You listen to this guy speak, and he screams Seahawks. He's like, it's really old business, kind of like really, you could just see him fitting in Seattle's defense completely. So he's somebody to look at. Elijah Hood, we've talked about, fits their style of running back that they look for. Luani, who's the guy from Washington State that I mentioned a moment ago, he's a guy you need to look at, because this is a guy who left American Samoa with nothing, with about $400 in his pocket. Left his family, left his friends, went to America to basically have a shop, to try and forge a career. He was living in a garage with 3 other players, I think, because the house he was living in was full. There was 20 players living in this house, so he had to sleep in the garage with like 3 or 4 other guys. They found out they were doing this. They evicted all the players. He had nowhere to stay. He found another family to go and live with because he had nowhere to go. On a chance, he ended up playing in the JUCO ranks. From there, he was recruited by all of the big Pac-12 schools like USC and whatever. I think he agreed to go to Oregon State, and then when Oregon State's coach left to go to Wisconsin, I think that's the way it worked. No, Nebraska. He went to Nebraska, didn't he? He reneged on that and went to Washington State instead. And when you've gone through that kind of adversity, you've proven that you love the game. You've kind of gone through everything to make a career of this. That's the kind of thing the Seahawks love. That's grit. That is the grit that they talk about, and battling adversity and character and stuff like that. You can go to a war with a guy like this. And then you watch him on the field, 4 interceptions this year, 4 interceptions last year, hits like a hammer, playmaker, looks athletic, safety. I could definitely, if this guy's not on the Seahawks next year, I'll be surprised. He just kind of screams Seahawks. Kevin King, a player that people will know all about. Then Dante Pettis, someone people will know about as well. They're the 2 guys I also had in this mock draft. Kevin King has got the size of a Seahawks corner, playmaker, someone maybe they could coach over time. And we know that they like these Washington receivers. They've had 2 of them on the practice squad. They've had Jermaine Kearse on the team for a while now. So we know that they like these guys. Pettis is somewhat similar in terms of production to Kenny Lawler and frame as well. So we know that they're prepared to take a receiver like this in the later rounds. So that's the 7-round mock. There's some of the names to keep an eye on. It's promising to be a really, really interesting draft for the Seahawks, I would think.
Great stuff. I think we've run out of time today on 3000 NFL Mock Draft. Lots of stuff about the Seahawks in the beginning, some stuff about the Seahawks at the end, stuffed with a bunch of nonsense from myself getting out a mock draft, which wasn't too bad. We got some stuff in there. There were some good picks, some bad picks. Definitely learned a lot from the players that fell out of the first round or went certain ways, and maybe needs of teams. And that'll change a lot over the next 5 weeks, just from the way that these draft picks shift as far as who's picking when. But I think what's clear is that Myles Garrett is a very clear favorite for the Cleveland Browns at number 1. Mitch Trubisky is pulling out as the number 1 quarterback. Leonard Fournette is going to be there, perhaps right there at the top. Jabril Peppers and some other guys in my mock draft that fell, like Reuben Foster. Well, we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think there was a lot of good info. This is 3000 NFL Mock Draft. If you like listening to it, subscribe to Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. Is that confusing? It is for me, but we're going to try and fix that in the future. But for now, that's just the way it is. And of course, you can listen on SeahawksDraftBlog.com. You can listen on SoundCloud. You can listen on FieldGoals.com. I think SoundCloud.com/FieldGoals. Thank you for listening so much to this episode. We're going to wrap it up. That's been this draft of the episode. Come back next week for a brand new draft.